I found that it's usually the little things that go unnoticed or unheeded that ruin us. The pernicious fine print, the subtle seductive glances of spouse and suitor, the vows that seem so easy to fulfill that they are included almost secondarily in the contract. We all understand why, for the worst, for poverty and in sickness are in there. I think for better and in wealth need to be understood a little more, but we've all read about lottery winners ruined by sudden wealth, or a successful couple torn apart by the temptations of new status. But in health, that was something I hadn't expected. I've always been the kind of person who believes in preparation. It was instilled in me by my mother. My father was a good man, one of the kindest and best I'd ever met, but he could be flighty. From him I learned my perhaps overdeveloped sense of compassion. I was a good man. Kindness costs nothing, Nate, he'd say when we were helping in the soup kitchen or organizing a clothing drive for our church. From my mother, the woman who always made sure our household ran like clockwork, that everyone got to where they were supposed to be on time, that there was never any doubt about the wealth or safety of our family, I gained a deep appreciation for preparation. I have always been grateful to my parents for the gifts they passed on to me, those two virtues, preparedness and compassion. Up until the darkest moment in my life, they helped me. Before we got married, Chloe and I talked about what might happen in our marriage. We discussed what our vows would mean to us. We planned what we would do in the event of a sudden twist of fate, for good or bad, how we would handle having to move and leave our families behind, how many children we wanted to have and when. We talked especially often about infidelity and whether our marriage could survive it. It wasn't that I didn't trust my wife, nor did she trust me, but she was an attractive woman, and I knew she had many admirers. When we met in college, she was a runner, actually a track and field star. In high school, she had set the state record in the 5K run, and she was still an elite athlete. She wasn't the prettiest girl in school. Her face was more conspicuous than anything else, and she spent her time worrying about race times rather than make up her hair. But she more than made up for it with a long, slender, tanned, and trim body, beautiful green eyes, and naturally curly blonde hair. I was under no illusions about what chances I had with her, but we became friends during sophomore year. I know some guys point fingers in Yale friend zone, but I never thought of it that way. I had a lot of female friends, and because I treated them as friends first and foremost, I didn't have a problem with dating either. Women seemed to appreciate the fact that I behaved with them as if they were real people rather than potential conquerors, and no marketing network compares to a group of female friends supporting their single male buddy. The transition that Chloe and I made from just friends to friends with benefits, and oh, I think we're dating now, was pretty standard for college life. We were both dating someone else, we both broke up around the same time, and as we comforted ourselves, we started looking at each other in ways we hadn't before. It wasn't some great romance, but it was good for us. In fact, it was great for us. Despite our differences, or maybe because of them, we quickly fell in love. Her eagerness inspired me to put myself out there in class. My compassion taught her to be a more generous winner and a more gracious loser. She didn't believe in training as much as I did, focusing mostly on what she absolutely had to do, but that was usually enough. You don't get up at 4 in the morning to train without having the desire to plan ahead. I joined her, albeit with a long way behind, and my fitness improved as a result. The conversations we had as we approached marriage, about fidelity, vows, and plans, became easy once I showed her their importance. Then they moved into the important enough to take seriously category, as did her exercise regimen. By the time we got married, a year after graduating from college, everyone thought we'd be the couple that would last until our golden anniversary and beyond. What's the saying? Man plans and God laughs. Our marriage has been wonderful for the most part. Our early friendship provided us with an easy rapport. We were experimenters, and my tendency to plan things in advance only contributed to that. One or the other of us would pick something we wanted to try, and then I would come up with all the things we needed to make, and if necessary, buy. She was very enthusiastic about the little surprises I arranged for her. There were problems, of course. She expected a lot of herself, and sometimes it bothered her that I didn't expect as much. I was happy with my life and her, and didn't feel the need to burn myself out on a job or hobby for some relatively trifling improvement in my skills or wealth. Chloe, on the other hand, was drive incarnate, not competitive, not with other people, which wasn't immediately obvious. She only competed with the Chloe who was in her own mind, the one who could always be better. I respected that, but it meant that sometimes she could be fickle in her moods and disappointed in herself when she didn't achieve her goals. At times, I felt like she was disappointed in me as well. But that rarely happened. We had a good life together and good times. She was ambitious and energetic, but we also enjoyed quiet times in the evenings after returning from work, after dinner and washing dishes. I worked as a software developer and she worked as a salesperson, and these professions fit our personalities quite well. We would cuddle up on the couch and relax, watch movies together, sometimes even just lay in bed on Sunday mornings when I could talk her into it. But more often than not, she wanted to go camping on the weekends. It was during one of these hikes that I first noticed a problem. Since they were supposed to be a form of relaxation, we hiked at an easy pace and enjoyed the scenery. I rarely had a problem with the pace, but she never did until that fateful day. Chloe found herself short of breath. When we got back to the car, she complained that her legs were tired. It turned out that she had been having these attacks for a long time, but she hadn't paid much attention to them, writing off the fatigue as the fact that she was older and had less time to exercise. According to her, it wasn't important enough to bring it up, but I was immediately concerned. After talking about it, I asked her to make an appointment with our family doctor the following Monday. He referred us to a specialist. The specialist referred us to another specialist, and then we got what was at that point the worst news of my life. Chloe has a rare form of muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is not a single disease. Like cancer, what we call muscular dystrophy is several different diseases and disorders that share the same symptoms. This means that treatments, age of onset, duration, and quality of life vary from disease to disease. And when we determined what Chloe's particular condition was, the prognosis was not good. Her life expectancy was probably around 20 years, and few of those were good. Her physical abilities were rapidly declining, and she required first a cane and then a wheelchair to get around. She became weaker and more easily fatigued until finally her body could no longer support its own functioning. My wife would pass away from pulmonary or heart failure before she reached the age of 45. Any chance of us having children was gone. Her disease was genetic, and although she had 2 copies of the gene, even the recessive variant meant that our children could be affected. Her parents were lucky and experienced no noticeable effects, but the thought of inheriting the disease was unthinkable. However, even if we were willing to take the risk, it was unclear whether her body would have the strength to carry and deliver a baby unless we dealt with it almost immediately. And then I would have to take care of the baby almost single-handedly, while also caring for my wife's weakening health. It wasn't worth the risk, and we decided to focus on improving her quality of life for as long as possible. No, we would not have children, and we would never see our golden anniversary. It is the little things that often become our undoing. A submicroscopic sequence of proteins, a small weakness that grows over time, a seed of fear sown by an inexorable end. Chloe tried to face it with courage, both of us. She wasn't dead, and we were going to live the time we had together to the fullest. We were young, but I had already planned for our financial needs. We set aside some money to travel for a few months, visiting places she had always wanted to visit while she could still walk. It was a wonderful respite from the terror. These trips to exotic places, trying to fit the experiences of a lifetime into the short amount of time she had left. We made love with a frequency and intensity that rivaled a honeymoon, knowing that fatigue and weakness would soon steal that ardent intimacy from us. We never talked about it directly, but the fear of losing that part of us long before the rest of us hovered in the back of our minds. I held her when she first wept, when she couldn't stand without her cane, when her long, skinny jogger legs gave out, when she tried to get out of bed on a cold winter morning. She slid helplessly to the floor, and a terrified sound escaped her throat at the realization that she was losing control of her body and that it was only going to get worse from here. She had been diagnosed only 3 years ago. "Please, Nate, please don't leave me. I can't do this alone." She clung to me as tightly as she could, but her arms were already weakening. Her frightened voice broke my heart. I smoothed her hair and kissed the top of her head. Shh, love. It's okay. Never. In sickness and in health until death do us part. I promised Chloe. That brought another wave of sobs from her, and all I had to do was hold her until they passed. Then I helped her to her feet, strapped to her new hated companion, a cane. 6 years after her diagnosis, she could no longer work outside the home and could barely work inside. She switched from sales to marketing because she simply couldn't maintain the level of intensity required for her first job, and for an even darker reason, she discovered that no one wanted to buy from a woman with a cane. Image matters, and she began to associate it with illness, which subconsciously repelled her potential customers. I moved on to a new job still in software development, but in healthcare. I decided that being associated with medicine gave me a better chance of including it in new clinical trials, and health insurance in that industry tended to be more comprehensive. It brought in less money overall, but not because there was no money in the industry, but because I didn't have the option to just switch to another industry when better financial opportunities arose. Our lovemaking came to not 8 years after my diagnosis, and a few years before that, we were on artificial life support. At first, it wasn't that she was physically incapable. Technically, we could still do it, but as we became more and more limited in our repertoire, Chloe's ego took a hit. As her body changed, she felt more and more unattractive, further compounding the damage. I did my best to tell her that I still loved her and thought she was beautiful, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, I took up with myself manually and tried not to get upset about it. One night, as we lay in bed together, Chloe asked, Do you want to date someone else? She made some kind of pathetic sound. Have another lover? I'd be lying if I said such a thought hadn't crossed my mind. But even if my attitude toward infidelity had changed, which it hadn't, there were logistical obstacles that made it nearly impossible. I could hire a prostitute, I suppose, but that was fraught with its own dangers. The last thing we needed was to get arrested. And trying to date, or even just making acquaintance, would be impossible if I were honest about my situation. What woman worth anything would want to date a guy who was just looking for a part-time job while his wife was dying at home? Hell, even leaving all that aside, I wasn't particularly attractive physically anymore. My muscles had gotten a little bigger from having to help Chloe, but that didn't mean I was trim and slender. I had strong but not ostentatious muscles covered in a layer of fat due to my inability to go outside and do aerobics. The weight gain was exacerbated by the need to cook simple, cheap, and quick meals that were high in calories, so I could get back to work or taking care of Chloe as quickly as possible. No, honey, no, I'm not going to do that to you. But, no, Chloe, I love you and I promise to leave everyone else behind. This is what I'm going to do. She hugged me tightly and cried. I'd like to think it was gratitude, but looking back, I think it was guilt. Who knows? Maybe it was both. 12 years after her death sentence, Chloe was permanently confined to a wheelchair with an expensive motor. Our house had to be converted to accommodate her. We needed a van with special equipment. There are programs to help with these issues, but they are inadequate at best. Her illness was draining us financially, and we were maxed out on credit cards trying to keep up with expenses. I resigned myself to the fact that I would watch my wife slowly with her and die, and then either declare bankruptcy or struggle with a mountain of debt for the rest of my life. I'd like to say that I bear it stoically, that I'm willing to pay anything to spend one more day with her, but I can't. This slow movement toward ruin, looking into a future without hope and a present without happiness, was wearing my soul out. I tried my best to hide it from her, to be as cheerful as possible when we were together, but at night I sometimes retreated to a secluded parking lot where I would sit alone and cry. This was not how I envisioned my future, our future when we were young and hopeful and deeply, madly in love. I still loved Chloe, but now there was such a sense of duty attached to it that it was hard to draw the line between where one began and the other ended. I knew that part of the reason I stayed with her was because of our vows, because it felt right. I had a shameful suspicion that it was that not my love for her that kept me by her side. I didn't want to be one of those assholes who leaves his wife when she's sick. I'd lost so much to that damn disease, and I didn't want to lose my self-esteem as well. I know it sounds like a self-pity party, and it was. I had to be strong around Chloe, had to try to be positive for her. Her body was deteriorating at an accelerated rate, and the end point of that was an early, painful death. I tried to keep that in mind to realize that my suffering was bad, but hers was worse. Chloe had gone from a vibrant, attractive, athletic woman to a wheelchair-bound burden to those who loved her. She took antidepressants and a whole rainbow of medications to help manage her symptoms. She was seeing a therapist. My wife worried more than any human being should, and I needed to shut her out so I could have my breakdowns in my own time. But they still happened. Yes, her suffering was greater, but that didn't cancel out mine. We started attending support groups around the time she had to move into a wheelchair. One for her, one for me. Her group was geared towards socializing with other people with muscular dystrophy, and mine was for caregivers. We made friends there, some of the first friendships we were able to maintain over the years. In particular, we became close to Dale and Katrina. Dale suffered from the same type of muscular dystrophy as Chloe. He and Katrina had been married a little longer than us and were a little older, but they understood what we were going through on a level that almost no one else did. Dale and I became fast friends. He, like me, worked in software development and was still active despite his illness. Hey, I sat on my ass all day long using only my fingers for years. What's changed? He had a wry, self-deprecating sense of humor. I knew he was hiding behind it, using it as a shield against the fear and pain caused by the disease, but we all have our own coping mechanisms. It seemed to work very well for him. Within a few years, he became one of my closest friends, and the closest I saw on a regular basis, more like a brother than just a friend. His relationship with Chloe was different from mine, but was perhaps more important. She had almost succumbed to despair that she would ever be the person she dreamed of being. He helped her see a different path to channel her suffering for good. She turned her marketing acumen to charity, helping various muscular dystrophy organizations, both a pastime and a way to give back to herself. Dale's friendship with and inspiration from Dale was the main reason Chloe didn't succumb to despair in the final days of her illness. Katrina and Chloe were friends, but not as close as Dale and Chloe. They were the least connected of all. Dale and I were software developers with nerdy interests. Dale and Chloe suffered from the same disease. Katrina and I were spouses and the primary, often sole caregivers of our dying spouses. Katrina and Chloe were just friends who had little in common other than what pushed us together from the beginning. Each of us brought something different to our new friendship. Dale's sense of humor, which lifted the spirits of Chloe and me, my talent for preparation, which helped Katrina and Dale find places in their routine that could be simplified and streamlined. Chloe's drive, which once unleashed again, inspired even Dale. Katrina was kind and gentle, which was nice, but it was her profession that helped Chloe and me the most. She was a masseuse, and I desperately needed one. As mentioned after Chloe's help, I was more muscular than when we first met. In her healthy state, she weighed just over 130, but due to her forced, sedentary lifestyle, her weight had climbed to 160. It wasn't exactly dead weight, but she could only help a little, and moving that kind of weight over and over again, often incorrectly until I learned proper technique, took a toll on my back. Katrina helped repair that damage with long, sometimes painful massage sessions that worked out the knots in my muscles, after which I felt like jelly. She taught me how to apply some of the same techniques, and with those skills, Chloe and I were able to regain the lost physical aspect of our relationship. We were both very grateful to our friend for this. Kat helped me with more personal things as well, though not physical. She and I would stay up late into the night talking either in person or on the phone. We became very close. Other than Chloe, I don't think I've ever had a connection like I had with her. We were two soldiers in a foxhole, facing an enemy that could never be defeated, and trying to shake off the depression of fighting an unwinnable war together. I have no illusions about the extent of our closeness. After a few years, we began an emotional affair. We shared things we could never share with our spouses, not only because we had no one to share them with, but because we understood each other and our difficulties on a level that no one, not even Chloe and Dale, could comprehend. Many times we talked about our spouses, the pain they felt, and the agonizing guilt we felt for resenting them and their pain. The selfish anger that we never had a life of our own was offset by a powerless rage that our spouses would soon have no life at all. The voices in our heads that told us, no one will judge you if you leave. And at the same time, we knew we could never live with ourselves if we did. Even the thought of such a betrayal made us even more miserable. We talked about things that could never be said to Chloe and Dale, and trusted each other to keep these shared, shameful secrets. We were in our own ways, intimately and completely connected to each other in a way that our spouses never were. And it was a source of both strength and even more guilt for both of us. It was an emotional affair that our spouses knew existed, though neither of us called it that. It was the kindness they did for us, their long-suffering partners. It was one of the few things they could do, a small gift of hope to diffuse our despair. In the back of our minds, we were all thinking about what would happen when Chloe and Dale could no longer fight, and they encouraged our closeness so that we would have someone to turn to in those dark days. During one of our late-night conversations over coffee, Katrina brought up a possibility that I'd long since hesitated against. If Chloe said you could find solace elsewhere, why not? I sighed. Because I'm just not built for it. I need to feel intimacy with someone. Prostitutes have never helped me with that. She chuckled, those sapphire eyes mocking me slightly. Are you saying we don't have a connection? That hurts me. You know that's not what I'm saying. Taking a sip, I gathered my thoughts and then took her hand and explained them. You're beautiful, Katrina. Wonderful. Yes, we have a connection. If it were otherwise, I'd love to explore it. But I can't let go of my vows. She started to speak, but I interrupted her. Yeah, even though Chloe says I can't, I didn't just make vows to her. I made vows to myself. Katrina smiled sadly, tilting her head to one side. She's so lucky to have you, Nate. I wish things were different. I'm set up the same way. I need a connection. I mean, Dale offered it to me years ago, but I never could find someone I wanted to be with. And now you're here, and she shook her head and brought my hand to her lips. Maybe in another life. We were entering the end game of our spouse's illness. It had been 15 years since their prognoses, and we both knew it. The other life might have come sooner than we thought, but to openly admit it was kind of gross. I don't mean that we were stalling, waiting for that invisible monster to take our spouses. We were just friends and had always behaved decently toward each other, but we also knew that rightly or wrongly, our lives would change very quickly in the near future. And so they did change, but not in a way that any of us could have anticipated. A miracle has happened. A technology called CRISPR showed great promise in treating a number of diseases that had a genetic basis. It allowed direct editing of the genes, causing the problems, essentially making changes to the body's source code. The technique has been successfully used to treat other forms of muscular dystrophy, but we didn't expect a treatment for Chloe and Dale's type to even reach the experimental trial stage until it was too late. Their type was one of the rarest and was far down the priority list. But as is often the case in modern medicine, a confluence of money and power changed priorities. The wife of a wonder-kind researcher, the son of a prominent venture capitalist, and the granddaughter of a powerful senator were all diagnosed. With these personal tragedies came funding and attention, and breakthroughs followed much faster than any of us could have anticipated. Experimental trials began. My work in healthcare and all the associated connections paid off. I was able to get Chloe and Dale on board. When I say it was a miracle, I don't just mean that the treatment came so quickly. I mean that it was incredibly effective. Within a month of starting treatment, Chloe was already working with a physical therapist to get back on her cane. 3 months later, she was walking unaided. And 6 months later, she was back on the treadmill for the first time in nearly 15 years. Dale's recovery was just as swift, and we all celebrated our triumph against this ghost that had plagued us for a decade and a half. Our friendships grew even closer, and we went out into the world again, something none of us had been able to do in years. We dined, drank, and danced in ways none of us had thought possible. Katrina and I were slightly embarrassed by our visions of what might have been, considering them an unfortunate omission in a time of weakness when we were both at our wits' end. Nothing happened, but the fact that we even brought it up as a possibility seemed disloyal to us. When I made love to Chloe for the first time in almost 10 years, it was tentative and with hesitation. I'd gotten so used to the idea that I could hurt her by improperly manipulating a limb when she was too weak to resist that I still hadn't fully realized she was strong again. But once we got over those first awkward touches, we plunged headfirst into the physical love we had both been deprived of for far too long. When we finished that first time, there were tears in her eyes, and she clung to me. "I missed it so much. I missed you so much, Nate. I never thought," she cried openly. "I never even dreamed that we could do this again, that I could be the wife you deserve. You—" She lovingly stroked my face. "I could never have gotten through this without you. You were— God, baby, I don't know how you were able to be so strong. I love you, Nathan. I will love you forever." I wish I could say we made love every night. I would have loved to, but the realities of my abilities, which were no longer in my 40s, the back injuries I had sustained caring for her, and a body that had been neglected due to poor nutrition and lack of exercise meant that I simply couldn't maintain the level of giving that we both craved. As she recovered, Chloe continued to run. It was then that we learned just how much and how long the disease had taken her. She was fast, and she was just as fast on long runs as she had been in college. The disease had probably hit her as a teenager without anyone noticing. We both suspected that she could have been an Olympic champion if treatment had been available then. The realization that the disease had stolen from her not only the previous 16 years, but also the person she could have become before, was a stunning blow. For someone who was so driven, the realization that this opportunity had been taken away from her for so long only made her even more stressed. What I didn't realize when it started was that she also started pushing me away. Chloe started training for marathons. I tried to join her, but I couldn't even vaguely keep up the pace. Even before my back injury, I was much slower than her, and even though the exercises were helping with the injury, they were still slowing me down. She switched to working out with a group, made new friends, saw men looking at her in a way they hadn't since we were newlyweds, perhaps even with more lust, given her body and stamina compared to other women over 40. Having finally had the opportunity to re-enter the job market, she returned to marketing. The time away from home had taken a bit of a toll on her, but this industry was changing much more slowly than my own. Technology had changed a bit, so had the methods, but the core skills hadn't changed enough in 10 years to take away her knowledge. Within a year of starting treatment, Chloe was already a rising star in her firm. She became a rising star elsewhere as well. In the muscular dystrophy community, she was seen as a shining example of what could be achieved after treatment. She was the light at the end of the tunnel for those waiting for approval of the experimental treatment she had received. We regularly received letters from other people with muscular dystrophy, telling us how her story had helped them keep hope alive that their suffering would soon end, that they could be the people they had been stolen from. It touched us both deeply, and sometimes I would find Chloe crying at our kitchen table with a letter from one of her fans clutched in her hand. I was the lesser star, the steadfast and inspiring husband who had led her through the darkness, but we both knew I was a supporting actor in the public version of her life. I was a little annoyed that I was seen almost as a minor figure. When she was interviewed, I would devote a few paragraphs, mostly to how I supported her or thought for her to get treatment. If my suffering was mentioned, it was always put in a light that made Chloe look better. Or if the writer was particularly clever as a parallel between how my health was suffering and how hers was suffering. Sometimes things I'd been through or things I'd had to give up were mentioned, but only to add to the overall pathos of Chloe's story. It sounds petty, and it was, but I suffered too, and suffered knowing that I could have walked away at any moment but didn't. I understood that they were mostly mood-boosting pieces, intended for either the general public or those who were suffering. I understood why there was such an emphasis in them. An attempt to give hope, detailing the realities of her husband's struggle detracted from that. It wasn't about me. So little. She traveled as part of her job. She traveled to perform. She traveled to marathons. All but the last of these trips were paid for by her work, or a charitable organization. Her friends and marathon groups paid for these trips, wanting to bring their mascot with them. Men seemed to contribute the most. Our massive debts meant that there was no way I could join her on any of these trips. When Chloe was home, she was attentive, but that rarely brought happiness. Now that she's back to 100%? No, 110%. The version she might have been if she'd never been sick, which she couldn't have been even when she was young. She had little sympathy for my aches and pains. Never mind that they were acquired while serving her. Never mind that not all of us have the genetics, except for one perversal leal or the drive to be a star athlete. She wanted to be up and moving, either literally hiking again or metaphorically trying to make up for time lost to illness with late nights spent partying like a 20-something. I understood that, but it wasn't what I wanted. She had a miraculous recovery, but there would be no recovery for me. No experimental treatment that would undo the slow degradation caused by time, stress, physical labor, and sleepless nights. Nothing could undo the wear and tear on my body caused by her support. I longed for respite after nearly 2 decades of struggle and tension when I had sacrificed the best years of my life for her, sacrificed the chance for children and a happy home in exchange for what? For a wife who was never home, for a life that would never be devoted to me, but always and only to her. I deserved happiness, damn it, and if her happiness wasn't in my hands, she should listen to my needs for once. Sometimes she tried. She couldn't stop moving, couldn't stop indulging that restless urge to try to make up for the decade and a half she'd spent locked up in a cage of flesh. In an attempt to make me happy, she channeled it into our bedroom. The pleasures of her body had been out of my reach for so long, and it was here that she was trying to show me that there was room in her new life for me and for the joy she would share with me and only me. Chloe was athletic and resourceful. Before her illness took away her health, we never got to do something she had long wanted to try, but even that was widening the gap between us. Her health was fine, mine wasn't, and that was leading to frustration for her, which made me question my own masculinity. This disparity worsened as her attraction increased, driven both by our age and her growing strength and stamina. She wanted more than I could give, and the frustrating nights spent listening to Chloe's battery-operated girlfriend come to her in the guest bedroom after I failed to meet her needs were extremely demoralizing. I at least took care of my own when she couldn't keep quiet and showered, doing my best not to make her feel the pain of my disappointment. She didn't give me even that grain of discretion. I don't know if it even occurred to her to try. On the night of our 20th anniversary, she had just returned from a 2-week business trip. A couple of work trips with a marathon in between culminated in a weekend, during which she inspired people suffering from muscular dystrophy anywhere. I had long ago lost interest in the details because she showed little desire to share them with me. But that night, Chloe was home. She was beautiful. It was a huge milestone we weren't sure we'd see, and we both put ourselves out there, gifts we still couldn't afford. A night spent dining and dancing as she preferred. Afterwards, she went to bed with me. "I love you, Chloe." She pressed her face against my side, never answering anything. I thought she might have fallen asleep, but she finally spoke. "You're such a good husband, Nate. I hope you know that. I need you to know that. I'm so grateful for everything. I could never—" My wife looked at me, tears in her eyes. "You deserve to be happy, Nate, more than anyone else." Then she made herself comfortable, hugged me tightly, and started snoring lightly before I could respond. Chloe didn't say she loved me. She said more, but she also said less. It bothered me, but I was so tired and blissful that I let the worry fade from my mind as sleep washed over me. In the morning, the wife was gone. There was a letter on the kitchen table. On it were her rings, and underneath them a couple of folders. With a trembling hand, I picked up the letter, letting the ring slip and roll away, lost somewhere in the morning gloom. "My dear Nate, I'm so sorry. I will never have the words to express how deeply disappointed I am in myself. You were everything a reasonable woman could ask for. And more, much more, you have gotten me through the worst thing that could ever happen to a human being, and I know I couldn't have done it without you. I will be forever grateful to you for that. All of this makes what I have to do now even more monstrous. I need to go and live my life again just for me. I can't explain to you the depth of that need, Nate. I thought I was going to die. No, I was going to die if you hadn't brought me to this trial. Another thing I can never thank you for. But now I have life and health again. I know we drifted apart while this was happening. I also know that it was mostly my fault. But now I see the possibilities in front of me, and I just can't spend another 2 decades with you just because of gratitude and memories of what we once were. I love you, Nate. I always have, and I always will. But I no longer love you the way a wife should love her husband. And as time goes on, I resent you more and more. I know it's awful of me to say or even feel this, but it's the truth. It's not fair to you, but neither is what happened to me. And I need to leave our marriage before resentment turns love into hate. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but I need to tell you to make it easier for you to let me go. Before I was diagnosed, I was already thinking about leaving our marriage. I loved you, but I saw that the goals I had set for myself didn't match up with what you really wanted out of life. When we found out about my illness, I was so afraid of being alone that I didn't say anything. It was cowardly. I am a coward. I know that. This letter proves it even more. I couldn't even tell you all this in person. You're the perfect husband for someone, Nathan. You were the perfect husband for me for a while. And somewhere out there, you will find a woman who will be your forever love, who will be perfect for you and take care of you the way you deserve. I wish it were me, both for myself and for you. I hope you believe that because it's true. I know you'll probably hate me. I don't blame you for that. I hate myself for doing it. But in time, I hope this hatred will pass for both of us. You deserve to be happy. We both do. But neither of us would be happy if I stayed. I want you to know that I have never cheated on you. I wouldn't leave you for another man. I was tempted, and that temptation is one of the things that made me reevaluate both who I was as a person and what I wanted out of my life. It also made me think about what I could honestly offer you. But of all the vows I'm breaking right now, this one isn't one of them. I have been faithful to you in this, if not in everything else. Please don't come looking for me. You're so smart, and I know you'll find me easily. I'm not going to hide, but I've taken a new job in California, and by the time you read this, I'll be on my way. I've only taken with me some clothes, a handful of personal items, and a few mementos of our life together. I can never forget you, but I want to keep them with me as a reminder of the wonderful man I was once married to, and as a reminder to myself of the cost of my selfishness. I deserve that. I also know that my illness has put us in dire financial straits. I don't know to what extent you have always addressed these issues. I leave it to your discretion what to do with what property we have left. I took $2,000 out of our savings to start a new life. Everything else is yours. I know you have talked about bankruptcy in the past. If you think it is best, please proceed. In this letter, you will find the initial divorce settlement offer and power of attorney. My attorney has been advised to give you whatever you wish and to follow your instructions on how to proceed financially. He is pro bono, so his time is limited, but he will help in any way he can. I know I'm hurting you right now. I wish there was another way out for you. I hope that in time you will remember me fondly. I will always think of you that way. You've always been the rock I could lean on. I only wish I could have been the same for you, with gratitude and sadness. Chloe, forever didn't even last 2 years. I sat there for I don't know how long. The sun was already high in the sky, and I could perceive the world around me again. Tears were streaming down my face, and my palms were bleeding from the deep cuts scraped by my fingernails. "You goddamn bitch," I growled angrily, standing up and flipping the table over. Like a wild, wounded animal, I scurried from room to room, breaking everything in sight, smashing our wedding china, knocking over tables and chairs, inflicting more wounds on my arms as I smashed picture frames with blows from my bare hands. When my strength left me long before my rage took over, I sat on the wreckage of our home, the wreckage of my life, and sobbed. By then, I was bleeding profusely. Not life-threatening, I don't think, but enough to make me realize I needed treatment. I called the only people I could rely on. Katrina, my voice was too weak to hear. "Nate, what's wrong? Help! Please, Kat, help!" And then I passed out. I woke up in the hospital. He and Dale got me there. The injuries weren't too extensive, but I would have to have stitches. My friends first thought I was the victim of a home invasion. They figured Chloe was on a business trip and someone had broken into the house and trashed it. But when I could talk, I told them the truth. They couldn't believe it at first. It was such a shocking betrayal and completely inconsistent with what they knew about her. But once they got me home, I was able to find the letter and envelopes among the trash strewn about my kitchen. Katrina screamed, "Oh, crap! How could she?" While Katrina ranted, Dale just sat with me, quietly supporting me with his presence. It was the flip side of their usual personalities, adding a bit of surrealism to what was going on. When Kat finally calmed down, she went and packed a bag for me. There was no way they would have left me alone in the state I was in, or the house. Dale drove me in my car to their house, and Kat stayed behind to clean up. She told me later that she tried to call Chloe's cell phone to tell her what she thought about it, but my soon-to-be ex-wife had already disconnected the connection. I stayed with them for several months, only occasionally returning to the house to salvage a few personal items, clothes, computers, and other necessities. Chloe downplayed the seriousness of our financial situation. I planned to talk to her about declaring bankruptcy a few weeks after our anniversary, not wanting to dampen the celebration with bad news. That worked out wonderfully for me. When the dust finally settled, we were left destitute and with a completely ruined credit history. Chloe already had a new rental apartment and a company car in Los Angeles, and the bankruptcy didn't affect either. She could continue to live there away from me. I was so confused when she left that I didn't even bother trying to find an apartment before the bankruptcy. Finding a new place would have cost me much more than the first and last month's rent and security deposit. I kept the wheelchair-accessible van. The family who needed it got it in a direct exchange for their slightly newer sedan, and they cried tears of joy. I had saved them tens of thousands of dollars. It felt good to do something for people who really appreciated it. Katrina and Dale worried about me. I would have worried too, but I didn't have the energy even for that. I sank into a deep, dark depression. None of it mattered. My life didn't matter, nor my compassion, nor my preparation, nor my sacrifice. My wife lived. I kept her alive. I kept her alive, treated her, and was there for her. And all I got in return was the equivalent of praise followed by a cosmic screw you. Being around my friends was painful. I tried not to think about what could have been. Not about what could have been with Chloe, because it was pretty clear now that it could never be. She was too much of a narcissistic bitch. But when I saw Katrina and Dale exchanging kisses and winks, the tiny caresses of two people grateful for the second chance fate had given them, I was ashamed to admit that I wished it had been me with Kat instead. That was the plan. That was what I was preparing for, even if only subconsciously. One day, Dale and Chloe would be gone, and Kat and I would be together. Maybe. But it wasn't going to happen now. I watched the second woman I'd ever loved be in the arms of another man, my best friend. And I couldn't decide what hurt more, the fact that I was alone or the fact that she wasn't. I tried to hide it. I was so grateful to them for picking me up and helping me through the worst time of my life. Worst time of my life. It's funny how new ones keep popping up all the time, but these were my dearest friends and they knew my moods. There was no way I could hide the pain from them. I just tried to pretend it was all about Chloe. But it wasn't working. One night, Dale and I were sitting with a group of friends. He was trying to distract himself from my thoughts by playing video games. Now that he had his strength and motor skills back, he was trying to catch up on the years of classics he never got to play. It was a good distraction, and I agreed, but on this night, as on most nights over the past few weeks, it just didn't work. He hesitantly said, "I know you and Katrina, you had plans for what happens afterward." After? If when Chloe and I don't get better? Before CRISPR? Not plans, really, just we weren't thinking that far ahead. Just tried to put one foot in front of the other. He grinned. That's what Katrina did. She and I talked about it, and I gave my blessing. He looked away, and I can't imagine that you, the king of training, didn't at least consider it. After a moment's hesitation, I said, I'm glad that is bad, as things have gotten from me. I'm glad you're together, that things worked out for you. And it did. It hurt. But Kat was happy, and Dale was happy. Even if I stayed in the win-win, I still couldn't wish them anything but good things. He smiled. Yes, but Dale still wasn't looking at me. But the offer still stands. It doesn't. Not I can't let Kat leave me. But if she and you, he finally looked at me. Without you, we wouldn't be together. Without your support, we might not have even made it to CRISPR. She was dying inside until you came into her life. I don't know if she would have been able to stay with me until the end. If that offer consoles you now, if being with her physically would... He swallowed. It's okay. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What? Dale nodded. She loves you as much as she loves me. I know that, and I know that we both owe you a lot. I love you too, man. You're like the brother I never had, and every good thing you do makes you less happy, and neither of us can stand it. Dale, I can't. Shaking his head, he continued, I don't want to know. When it's going to happen, I've already talked to Kat. She knows I'm blessing you, but I just don't tell me about it, okay? I know you won't try to take her away from me. That he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. It's okay. If something happens to you, it will. Without you, we couldn't be together. It won't hurt us, really, I promise. My friend walked out of the room, his face reflecting pain and determination. I sat like that, my mind whirling until I finally got up, turned off the light, and went to bed. For weeks, nothing happened. Neither Dale could train A nor I discussed the subject again. I tried to treat it as a flashback, as a sincere display of love and gratitude that I could never realize. He loved me enough to suggest it. I loved him enough not to pursue it. But that detente was broken unexpectedly early Saturday morning. I was bothered again by my back, which never stopped hurting. Dale wasn't home. He had left with his cycling group probably before lunch. Katrina noticed me stretching on one side. Need a massage? I opened my mouth to answer, but Dale's suggestion made me pause. Kat hadn't given me one since Dale and I had talked that evening. She chuckled. It's just a massage, Nate. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. I blushed, which made her laugh. Come on, you know the drill. But I realized where this was going, so I said, Kat, we can't. She smiled at me. We can, Nate. It's okay, I love you. But she wasn't mine, and she never would be. She belonged to Dale, and I knew that would ruin them, no matter what each of them said. If things had gone the way we expected before the treatment, I would have loved her for the rest of our lives. I knew that now as surely as I had ever known anything. But it hadn't. And so I loved her, and I loved him, and I loved them. No, it was the hardest thing I'd ever said, that single lonely word. She stopped. Nate? No, Kat, we can't. I won't. Sitting up, I nudged her upright. I love you two so much. No, like I've never loved anyone. If things were different, yes, I would. I chuckled. Well, it's best not to elaborate, but I'd love you forever. The word came out hoarse with sadness and unsatisfied desire. Why? I smiled sadly. You know why? Kat shook her head. He said it was okay. We talked about it. We love you. We both do. It doesn't have to be. I kissed her and then pulled away. How did that make you feel? The woman I loved looked away, shame reflected on her face. This isn't going to work out. We both know that. She closed her eyes and nodded miserably. This was too much. We would be too much. Too much to limit ourselves to just a physical relationship. Too much for her marriage to survive. She didn't love me any more than she loved him. I had to cling to that belief to stay strong. And I loved them both. I wanted them both to be happy. And that meant I would have to suffer alone again. We talked to Dale before I left. I let him know that it was a mutual decision, that we hadn't gone further than the briefest temptation. The relief on his face and hers showed that I had made the right decision. They helped me pack up the car and hugged me tightly, and we all barely held back tears as we said goodbye. I cursed my father's lessons, the foolish notion that kindness was worthless as I left behind the last people I loved. A new city, a new job, a new life that I hoped would be better than the one before, a new future with nothing left of my past but misery. The betrayal of the woman I married, the heartbreaking disappointment of never being able to be with the one I loved. Deprived of all comfort, I wallowed in darkness. I spent the first year after moving out obsessing about my ex-wife, trying to find ways to hurt her and ruin her life the way she had ruined mine, and with some success. Rumor had it that she was going to be one of the faces of the marketing campaign for the treatment that saved her life in ruined mine. The letter she left me was circulated far and wide. I paid a search engine optimization firm to make sure it showed up in the top 10 results when her name was searched. The press secretary job never materialized, and her public appearances seemed to have dried up as well. There wasn't much I could do, however. I kept up with news about her, occasionally checking her social media. When she announced her engagement to avenge her capitalist, I made sure he got a copy of the letter. They were married anyway, so it didn't have the proper effect. I gleefully noted that they divorced after a couple years and that he cheated on her. In the years that followed, I took comfort in the fact that what happened to me was by no means uncommon. We were called CRISPR widows, a group of long-suffering spouses, mostly women, who were abandoned by their partners when treatment gave them back the strength they had lost years or decades before. The typical scenario that made up most of the cases was very similar to Chloe's, something like a midlife crisis on steroids. Men who missed out on the vigor of youth and suddenly got a semblance of it years later abandoned en masse the women who had given up their youth and health to take care of them. However, as with many things, there were more nuances than this simple scenario. Sometimes the disintegration of the relationship resembled what many single spouses suffer from. Without a common enemy, an illness to keep them together, they drifted apart. And sometimes the caregiver, long unhappy in the relationship but staying in it out of a sense of duty, decided she'd had enough and left. It got so bad that the phenomenon was given a more clinical name, and mandatory family counseling became part of the protocol for administering various CRISPR drugs. It helped me too late, but I was glad to know that what befell my marriage could be prevented in others. It was a dozen years before I saw Chloe again, and for the last time in person. In one of my increasingly infrequent visits to her social media pages, I learned that she had terminal and inoperable cancer. I contacted her, finally breaking the radio silence I had been since our divorce. Her response was immediate. She asked me to visit her at her expense. It was the little things that got to her again. The quickly overlooked warning about the increased risk of cancer due to CRISPR. The ignored persistent cough, the tiny black spot on the X-ray that had grown and spread before it was discovered. If she had never left me, I would have continued to follow up with her to make sure she got the additional tests she needed. Now, however, she would die alone and unloved. It was a 1,000-mile journey to the final appointment, which in her cowardice she had refused when she left. I ignored her offer to pay, deciding to do it on my own terms. When I reached the right floor of the hospice, I stopped, took a few deep breaths to calm myself, and knocked on her door. Chloe was almost unrecognizable. Even during the worst days of her battle with muscular dystrophy, she hadn't looked this weakened and exhausted. Death hovered over her, a companion that I was sure would take her with her on her journey soon after I left. Nate, a faint smile lit up her face. "Thank you. Thank you," she coughed. "For coming to see me, She wheezed some more, reaching for a small cup next to the bed. I limped toward her, leaning on my cane, a cheap, scratched, hollow metal rod with duct tape on the handle. My clothes, musty, stained, and threadbare, hung loosely on me, and she looked at me sadly and anxiously as I came closer. There were ice cubes in her cup. I took one out and brought it to her lips. My ex-wife took it into her mouth with an appreciative sigh. We never reached that stage until she was cured, but I knew the rhythms and patterns of end-of-life care from friends who passed away before a miracle could save them. There was a chair next to her bed, and I sat down, releasing the tension from my back with a quiet groan. She spoke again. Nate. I owe you a soft horse laugh that turned into a coughing fit. I owe you more than I can say, but most of all, I owe you an apology. I shook my head. No, Chloe, you owe me 20 years of my life back, but I never seem to get that, do I? I didn't try to hide my anger. I think it surprised her. Very sick people are so rarely exposed to other people's rage, even when they quite deserve it. After pausing a moment longer, Chloe continued, I know if things were different, if I could do things differently, I would. Please believe me, I would. Easy for you to say. She snorted. Please, Nathan, you've always been so kind. I don't care what you need. My ex-wife recoiled slightly. I'm not kind or compassionate. I can't be that anymore. You took my compassion, Chloe. You took it and you killed it. You killed me along with it. Her eyes grew moist. No, Nate, please, no. My voice was barely stronger than hers, but the rage gave it menace. Yes, what did you think was going to happen, Chloe? You told me I wasn't good enough, that I was never good enough, that you played me and abused my love and trust. I laughed bitterly. I used to think that when you begged me to stay, it was just fear of death. But later I realized it was because you'd leave me if our positions were reversed, didn't you? She couldn't meet my gaze. I was never as strong as you, Nate. No, you weren't. You stupid, selfish bitch. I took a couple deep breaths. When you left me like that, God, I hated you, but it was more than just hate. She pulled away from me. You destroyed everything good in me, Chloe. My compassion, gone. What's the point? There's no justice in the world, no real kindness, at least none that I can believe in. How can I trust another woman when my wife lied to me for 20 years and then a weak retort escaped her lips? I loved. Shut up, you treacherous, worthless, cancerous whore. I feared someone would come in and stop this. My final moment of retribution against this demon in the flesh lying on his deathbed and tried to change my voice again. My training, none of it mattered, not in the slightest. I married someone whose fidelity and love I was sure of, and she wasn't. I had planned a happy family that we could raise together. Illness ruined those plans. I did my best to keep our finances together during your illness. We went bankrupt. I tried to surround us with friends who knew what we were going through. I lost them because it hurt too much to be around them after you were gone. Through clenched teeth, I hissed. I even planned for the future, planned for the possibility of another love after you were gone. And even that was ripped from me because of that damn cure. The cure that I found for you, that I put all my efforts into making it available to you. You lived and betrayed me. Her husband lived, and I couldn't do that to him. And now the woman I fell in love with, whom I loved far more than I loved you, is forever out of reach. Now she was openly sobbing. She had expected that with years my pain would be dulled, that I would be the gentle and kind man who had cared for her for 2 decades, not a madman ranting at her bedside. I leaned back, relaxing slightly. Not out of kindness, but out of fear that her heart might give up before I could finish. I left the town we lived in together shortly after you did. I had nothing because of you, not one damn thing. You stole everything from me with your selfishness and cowardice. I spat out. I wish you were dead. Chloe barely managed to squeeze out between painful sides. Please, Nate, and please don't say that. If you were dead, I'd at least believe that my suffering meant something, that it was worth something. I wouldn't have known that you lied to me for 2 damn decades. But instead, I looked away. Instead, I'm just counting down the time until I die. She whispered, You didn't find anyone? I was sure you would, that you would find someone who deserved you. You were so loving, so beautiful, you could have... Of course I didn't find you. How could I build love without trust? Hell, how could I build friendship without trust? And how could I trust anyone after what you did to me? No, Chloe. The only intimate time I've had since then has been with whores like you. But at least I knew I was paying for their time, and they never disappointed me when they left. Oh, Nate. Oh, God, I'm so sorry, babe. My gaze returned to her. Don't. You can never call me that again. You can't pretend to love me. You can't feign regret and sadness like you had no idea what you'd do to me. You're selfish, Chloe, and you're a monster, but you're not stupid. She looked down at her frail, gaunt hands. I thought you were so nice. So nice. Sincerely thought you were... Her jaundiced eyes returned to mine uncertainly. You were always strong, I thought... But you broke me. No one can be that strong, Chloe. No one. I barely forced myself to stand up, looking at her with a grin. I wish I'd never met you, Chloe, that we'd never gotten married. That I left you when you were diagnosed. Nate, The grin turned to a snarl. I've long wanted to leave you crying on the floor the first time you fell. Push your wheelchair down the stairs, smother you with a pillow when you were too weak to fight back. That's what I think you deserve, Chloe. I chuckled as she cried. But now I'm glad I didn't. I was wrong. You deserve to suffer so much for what you did to me. I turned to leave and waddling and shuffling headed for the door. Before I opened it, I have turned to her. I hope you last a little longer, Chloe. I hope it's excruciating. The pain you feel counting down the hours. If you want me to be happy, survive as long as you can. She groaned as I opened the door and walked out. The nurse pushed me as I ran past toward my ex-wife's room. Stepping outside, I stood up straight. My back was killing me. It was my own fault for that prank with the cane. It rarely bothered me now, except when I did something stupid like pretending to be a cripple to drive my ex-wife crazy with guilt. I won't make that mistake again. Before heading home, I turned in my clothes to the donation center. It was my old casual outfit that I had started wearing when I was gardening. Marion had been urging me to get rid of them for years, but we weren't in need of money. The cane would also be a gift. It had belonged to my wife's ex-husband, but he no longer needed it. I met Marion at a CRISPR Widows support group. She had peacefully separated from her husband when they became estranged after the struggle ended. They were still friends, but the spark had faded. He had attended our wedding 6 years earlier and was still in our lives as a great second parent. I was notorious among widows, being one of the few men whose wife had left him in this way, and also one of the few who had so spectacularly voiced their grievances in public. They all dealt with their anger and bitterness in their own way, and it was through their support that I found the help I needed. Marion was at the top of the list of those who helped me. We became friends first, and then grew to love each other as I learned to trust people again. Dale and Katrina were at our wedding. At first, I couldn't keep in touch with them. It was too hard. But as I started my new life, I reached out to them. Dale and I still played online games together, and Katrina and I talked to each other from time to time. Marion knew about our past, but she also knew she was my future. There was no jealousy in her, only gratitude for the woman who had been my beacon during the darkest times of my life, and for the man who was willing to risk his happiness for mine. Marion and her ex-husband had children before they learned of his disease. His version was recessive, and they were lucky it wasn't hereditary. Thad and Terry were wonderful kids, almost to college already, and I had to restrain my desire to spoil them. To be honest, I didn't fight back very often. What I told Chloe, if it was unclear, was a mixture of truth, innuendo, and outright nonsense. I really did have all those feelings for her: rage, hatred, and a desire for her suffering. After leaving town, I tried to find a counselor to help me deal with the pain, but they all seemed to want me to forgive her. It seemed like a no-brainer. How could I forgive a betrayal of this magnitude? This wasn't a spouse who cheated in a moment of weakness or let his alcoholism or depression temporarily turn him into something awful. This was a narcissistic monster who stole half my life. No. Eventually, with the help of friends in my support group, I found a psychologist who understood that different people need to deal with massive betrayal in different ways. I couldn't allow myself to become consumed by hate. That became my first goal once I stopped isolating myself from others. Ultimately, I wanted to find love again, even if it seemed like an insurmountable task. I was lonely, lonelier than ever, and I was going to do something about it. So together with my psychiatrist, I planned, prepared, talked, and worked. The tool I found, the tool I created for myself with it, was simple. I had heard the saying, holding on to hate is like swallowing poison and expecting it to kill your enemy. I couldn't let go of the hate. I just couldn't figure out how to do it, and I wasn't sure I even wanted to. Instead, I mentally pictured a bubble, a poisonous green bottle with a cork in which I kept my angry thoughts about Chloe. At first, it was hard for me to keep them there, to keep that poison in a safe place, away from everyday life. But as time went on, this simple mental exercise became easier and easier until the hate began to seep out only when I intended it to. And now, finally, I took that vial and shoved it down that bitch's throat. I whistled happily as I paced down the street, enjoying the bright midday sunlight. Soon I would be back on a plane to my love and foster children, and I felt lighter than I had in years. The hate was no longer just contained. It had finally left me, and the future opened up in front of me. I took the time to thank myself for the many little joys in my life. Sometimes it really is the little things. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.